Another major story happening in Iran. President Trump issuing a new warning to Iran's leaders as the Islamic Republic uses brute force to put down fiery protests breaking out across the country, including in Tehran.
Madeleine Rivera is live in Washington with these details. Madeleine, this is really remarkable stuff we're watching.
It really is. And the deaths in Iran are growing as the country's supreme leader signals a bigger crackdown on the protests. At least 65 people have been killed per the human rights activists' news agency. This includes 7 people under 18 and 14 members of the security forces. Authorities imposed a sweeping internet blackout that largely cut off the country from the outside world. This morning, Secretary of State Marco Rubio posted the United States supports the brave people of Iran, a sentiment backed by President Trump, who warned the U.S. would be responding forcefully if the regime resorts to mass violence.
So Iran's in big trouble. We're watching the situation very carefully. I've made the statement very strongly that if they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard where it hurts. And that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard. I just hope the protesters in Iran are going to be safe, because it's a very dangerous place right now. And again, I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting, because we'll start shooting too.
Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei is taking aim at the U.S., saying it's wrong about its calculations about Iran, indicating the country will not give in to foreign influences.
The Islamic Republic was established with the blood of several 100,000 honorable people, and it will not back down in the face of those who engage in destruction, nor will it tolerate mercenaries serving foreign powers.
Iran's judiciary chief says there will be no legal leniency for the protesters. Charlie, Rachel, and Griff.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie.
You know, we spent a lot of time last weekend talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall and this the situation in Venezuela, whether or not that was the biggest similar deal since then. I don't know if that was or not. If the mullahs of Iran lose power in Iran, that will be the biggest game changer in the world since the fall of the Berlin Wall.
I totally agree. If they topple Ayatollah Khamenei, it will be the most consequential event, perhaps, of the 21st century, and will fundamentally reverse 47 years of terror and oppression and reset the map in the Middle East.
Yeah, and that repression, by the way, has fallen largely on women in Iran. And I haven't heard a lot of female voices talking about that.
And the women, the images
women are the bravest ones
Tehran,
in this,
who are standing up to these people, risking it all. They're the bravest people you'll ever see. It's really inspiring.
President Trump with a major warning to Iran as we approach 2 weeks of deadly protests.
So Iran's in big trouble. And that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts. I just hope the protesters in Iran are going to be safe, because it's a very dangerous place right now. And again, I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting, because we'll start shooting too.
Now, this comes as Iran's supreme leader threatens a greater crackdown, saying, quote, the Islamic Republic will not back down in the face of vandals. Trump should know that world tyrants were brought down at the peak of their arrogance. He, too, will be brought down. Here to talk about it, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Rick Crawford. And Congressman, a Wall Street Journal editorial board took notice of this major development. The headline, the Iranian people answer the call. Inside, they write, this may be a rare moment when revolutionary change is possible. The fall of a regime that has spread terror and mayhem for 47 years would be earth-shaking. This is an opportunity, call it an obligation, for the U.S. and the world to rally to the side of the Iranian people. What, sir, do you make of this?
Well, I think it's important to note that they said the U.S. and the rest of the world. I think it's important that Europe recognize this opportunity as well. I mean, we can do things unilaterally if we need to, but I think this would be much better received from a global perspective if you had the European Union that recognized this is a pivotal moment for us to support the Iranian people. And there's a lot of historic context I think we need to look at here as well. I mean, what you're seeing here on your screen, this is a result, the fact that this got out after they basically shut down communications, you can attribute that to Elon Musk for keeping Starlink online so that they could communicate with the outside world. So we're seeing this stuff go on. It's a little different than we've seen in the past. We've seen these popular uprisings take place on a small scale here and there in various locations around the country. but it's different this time. And if they really want to sustain this effort, go back to 1979. What really made the difference in that uprising was the oil field workers went on strike. They quit working. They hit him where he lived financially. If they really want to shut this down, this regime basically lives paycheck to paycheck. If they can cut off that flow and they strike in the oil fields, those Iranian roughnecks say, nope, we're not going to support the regime, that's when you'll probably see this come crumbling down.
Well, you mentioned, it's different this time. Why, Mr. Chairman, is it different? We know this began in late December when the currency devaluated tremendously, and it started as an economic protest that's now turned into a full overthrow of the regime. But why is this moment different, and what might be the implications if they are able to overthrow Khamenei?
Well, I think Operation Midnight Hammer had an awful lot to do with it, for one thing. I think that was a signal to the Iranian people that the Americans weren't playing around, that things would be a little different this time. We've seen President Trump demonstrate strong resolve in dealing with Venezuela and the way he's handled that. He's not backed down at all. In fact, he's stepped that up. You've seen that he's shown a lot of resolve with regard to how he's operating in with Russia and Ukraine, trying to bring that to an end. He has stopped numerous conflicts around the world. And I think that they believe that they take him at his word. When he says that we're not messing around, don't go after the Iranian people. If you do, there'll be consequences. I think you can take him seriously. And I think the Iranian people do and believe him when he says that.
Lastly, Mr. Chairman, is it time for President Trump to act with what we're seeing in Iran?
I think that, that's a decision that he'll have to make. I think the conditions are ripe, if you will, for not only the United States to recognize this opportunity for a not just a Middle Eastern reset, but a global reset. After almost 50 years of the largest state sponsor of terror, the blood on the hands of this regime over 50 years is incalculable. And it's time that we did take up the opportunity to support the Iranian people who are fighting for their freedom.
And they are brave Iranians indeed. We shall be continuing to follow this very closely. Chairman Crawford, thank you for taking time.
Want even more Fox News on YouTube? Become a Fox News Patriot today. Click join to find out how.